Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's lovely to see you all, and maybe other people trickling through, but we're going to make a start because I'm sure we're all excited to hear Tiffany speak this evening. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Tiffany Barber, who is an award-winning scholar, curator, and critic, whose work reshapes staid understandings of race, gender, and representation. A sought-after voice in contemporary art, culture, and fashion, her expert commentary spans academic journals, museum exhibitions, acclaimed documentaries, and major media outlets like the Nation and Huffington Post. And as an assistant professor of African American art at UCLA, Dr. Barber blends art history, performance theory, and Black feminist thought in ways that challenge institutions to advance new cultural futures. She's author of Undesirability and Her Sisters, Black Women's Visual Work and the Ethics of Representation, which she published with New York University Press in 2025 and is really worth a read if you haven't already. And the title of her talk tonight is Clara Walker, Contemporary Art and the Black Female Bottom. Welcome, Tiffany. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Dot and Diego and everyone at the Research Forum here at the Corso for inviting me to share my work. I'm trying to make sure my necklace isn't making noise up here. A little percussion for the talk. I am going to talk a little bit today from my first book and some new material that actually is extending from my first book, so you'll be the first to hear it. Lucky you. And the cover for my book is here. There is a UK distributor. I have no idea how any of that works, but they do ship here. So if you haven't been able to secure a copy yet, they are still available. Undesirability and Her Sisters is a 4-chapter study of unruly Black female figures in contemporary American art and their makers. This focus on the unruly, the undisciplined, the inestimable is tied to recent revolutions in thought concerning refusal that have emerged at the nexus of Black study, feminist study, and queer study, and how these fields intersect with, co-constitute, and ultimately unravel the discipline and practice of art history. Part of this focus also stems from my own experience as a Black woman scholar who came to the study of art and its histories through the back door. I came to the discipline circuitously through embodied practice as a dancer and curator, through field work and working in the field, as it were, having not studied art history in college. Even still, I was well aware of how museums and art history disregard and attempt to discipline Black female subjects through plantation logics that undergird their collecting priorities and dominant narratives. Charting a new genealogy of Black women's art that looks outward and inward simultaneously, my book collates what I term undesirable representations of nausea-inducing, perverse Black female bodies in recent American sculpture, collage, photography, and performance. In the wake of contemporary art's post-Black turn, the mainstreaming of intersectionality, and the public and political backlash to both, such representations evoke olfactory, sonic, and haptic responses that tarry in negativity vis-a-vis toxicity, bottoming, dismemberment, opacity, and race play. Typically considered counterintuitive to art history's popular centrism and politically harmful to Black and feminist solidarity, these strategies directly undermine the expectation for Black women's work to salve historical pain and trauma, and to be aesthetically and politically pleasing. Despite Black women's increased visibility in the art world and deeper public understanding of the Black feminist concept that mutually reinforcing vectors of race, gender, sexuality, and class constitute subjectivity, narrow ideas about racial and gender representation continue to homogenize Black women and their creative aims. Books solely devoted to Black women artists are also rare. Undesirability and Her Sisters transmutes both monolithic interpretations of intersectionality and the dearth of humanities and museum scholarship on Black women artists by recalibrating how everyday viewers, museum professionals, and humanities experts understand the radical promise of Black women's art in the new millennium. Restoring fragments of identity and cultural history to some sense of wholeness animates much of the literature on Black aesthetics, while Black women have historically been constrained by protocols of behavior and reproductive value in the public and private sphere. In the art world, These protocols materialize in expert and lay expectations that Black women artists working in the United States and the broader Atlantic world address their work to slavery and its legacies in order to effect racial healing and empowerment, to thus testify to and ultimately redress the sociological and physiological conditions of their own subjugation. The artists and artworks I analyze not only reject outmoded representational protocols that require Black women to narrate and perform their own subjection in a marketplace that simultaneously and structurally negates their personhood, yet voraciously consumes their work and public personas. They invite emerging and established humanities scholars, museum professionals, and art enthusiasts alike to consider if and how a body that has been negatively configured as an abject object might still be productive or generative, even if counterintuitively so. For 9 consecutive weekends in 2014, a colossal sugar-coated sphinx could be seen in the now-defunct Domino Sugar Refinery in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Droves of people, myself included, stood in line for hours in New York's summer heat to ogle Carol Walker's A Subtlety and to snap a picture of it. When I finally made it into the refinery, I was overwhelmed, not so much by the sight, but by the smell. The molasses-caked walls emitted a scent so strong as to be nauseating, and the various elements of the installation, like the refinery itself, were rapidly disintegrating. The Sphinx's 15 sugar babies, a cadre of handy-coated, resin-cast servant boys with stereotypical Black features positioned throughout the rooming space, were completely coated in molasses, melting and crumbling to pieces like the refinery's walls. 5 feet tall with cherubic faces, all a similar shade of brown, some of the sugar babies stood amid melted pools of dark liquid that resembled the color of blood, a mix of humor and horror, similar to the grotesquerie that subtends Walker's signature cut vinyl silhouettes, for which she is most known. Over the course of the exhibition's run, the sugar babies' baskets, historically intended for the collection of fruit, sugarcane, and other crops, slowly accumulated the dismembered arms and heads of the other molasses boys that had collapsed and shattered from subjection to the heat. The Sphinx itself was monumental and nude, a stark white female figure with the head of a mammy, a stereotype that originated in antebellum slavery in the United States. In American literature and visual culture, the mammy is typically depicted as overweight, desexualized, yet gratuitously open to the threat of sexual violence, a condition of the Black female slave experience. This figuration incited criticisms that the installation made light of ongoing racial harm and pain that stems from slavery and Black women's historical and contemporary subjugation. Walker is no stranger to this type of critique. Across her oeuvre, her figures walk the line between stereotype and archetype, obscenity and irony. Much of the controversy surrounding the artist stems from the attention her darkly humorous work receives from the predominantly white art world, from her well-known silhouettes to her recent public sculptures. With every exhibition and new body of work, since her 1994 debut at the Drawing Center in New York, Walker has inspired debates about the right and wrong ways to picture and perform Blackness and Black womanhood. Undesirable figures such as Topsy-Turvy, the Mammy, the Negress, an alter ego that the artist adopted early on in her career, and other stereotypes about Black women's bodies, sexualities, and their reproductive capacities recur throughout. From the two-dimensional to the three-dimensional, Walker resuscitates images of the Black female form, minstrel, monstrous, stereotypical, and more, but does not redeem them. One of the most visible and viral Black women artists working today, her self-conscious engagements with subjection and abjection illustrate how the increased visibility of Black women's creative labors, aesthetically and politically, impact how we theorize art of the Black diaspora. The artist's topsy-turvy post-slavery world imbricates racial and sexual fictions, spotlighting how the Euro-American imaginary classifies Black creative expression as deviant. All of her silhouette figures, most of which are Black in color, are engaged in freaky business. Women and children suckle each other's breasts, others are impaled, dismembered, and defecating on pristine white walls. More still are caught in acts of autofellatio and forms of sexual degradation. Beyond what Black American cultural studies scholar Christina Sharp calls monstrous intimacies, Walker's silhouettes are black holes, spatial terrains that prompt a wider view of Black female sexualities and their potential. Such black holes, Black American feminist science studies scholar Evelyn Hammonds tells us, appear empty, but are in fact, quote, dense and full, end quote, in the ways that unmoor heteronormativity's entanglements with race. Walker's work overturns assumptions about, quote, Black female sexualities being structured along an axis of normal and perverse paralleling that of white women, end quote. Following Walker, mediating Hammonds, quote, we might find that for Black women, a different geometry operates, end quote. By drawing black and white into such peculiar gravitational relations vis-a-vis color, phenotype, and kink, Walker makes visible how Black sexualities muddy the boundaries of normalcy and knowability. The imagined deviance of her Black figures, regardless of their racial markings, effectively contaminates sexualities historically thought to be pure and pristine, a post-slavery geometry and geography of excrement, waste, toxicity, and filth. Walker's silhouettes have come to define her career, and they have inspired an equally exhaustive amount of literature on the subject. Much has also been written about her text-based works on paper, her films, and her cyclodramas. But the relationship between her silhouettes and her public artworks remains underexplored, as does Walker's articulation of the frictions between Black womanhood and publicness in her life and career. Instead of rehashing the robust body of scholarship and criticism on her silhouettes, in this talk I sketched a new perspective on the artist that conjoins her recent shift to public sculpture with Black female bottoming. Although this trope is present in her earlier work, the Black female bottom has grown in both scale and materiality in her public sculptures of late. A Subtlety from 2014 and Fons Americanus from 2019 amplify how fantasies and fictions about the Black female bottom in American culture as a body part and a spatial and environmental concept refract and constrain Black women's creative and sexual expressions. Scale and materiality in these works perform excess that in turn produces more excess, thus compounding abjection at the level of ingestion, olfaction, and planned ruin. One a factory-sized installation and the other a sprawling fountain, a Subtlety and Fons Americanus transmute the displays of sexual and racial abjection in Walker's silhouettes to aesthetic experiences that reach beyond the visual. The first inundated viewers with olfactory and gustatory effects that mirrored the decaying and degrading ruins of the space it occupied. The second also addressed space and ruin, that of the Black Atlantic and its relationship to British and American imperialism. Its height towered over its viewers, positioning them as lower figures, overwhelmed by the fountain's size and figuration. Its structure, on the one hand, placed the recurring figure of the Black female slave at the top, a reversal that prioritizes the bottom. Both installations espouse negativity as a productive strategy for grappling with the complexities of Blackness, womanhood, and subjectivity. Built from blocks of polystyrene foam and coated in sugar, bleached to a blinding monochromatic white, a Subtlety is a site-specific work where the venue and materiality played key roles in the installation's conception, creation, and display. Originally built in 1856 by the Habermeyer family, Domino was the first of dozens of sugar refineries that contributed to Williamsburg, New York's emergence as the industrial center of the Port of New York in the 19th century. By the end of the Civil War in 1865, the refinery had become the largest in the world, employing over 4,000 workers and processing more than half of the sugar consumed in the entire United States in a single day's output. The Mammy's racist history looms large here, vis-a-vis Aunt Jemima, the face of other sugary foodstuffs, and in the preparatory sketches for A Subtlety, Walker draws and redraws the Mammy figure. But contrary to the amiable, non-threatening, obedient, and asexual servant who performs the role of nurse and caretaker, A Subtlety's Mammy confounds aesthetic and social norms in two ways. First, the over-embodied, offending figure surpasses the referential classical form, an idealized female body in the shape of a nude sphinx, which many viewers further objectified through lewd gestures and selfies shared on social media. Documentation of these fetishistic antics in front of and behind the Sphinx confirm that Walker's monumental mammy is indeed a register for brands of race and gender that refer to the particular and peculiar American context from which it springs. In this libidinal schema, the Sphinx's nude female body doubles as icon and trademark, monument, and meme. Second, the mammy head coupled with enlarged breasts, oversized buttocks, and exposed vulva quixotically transmogrify the glaringly white Sphinx. That is, the stereotype's deviant blackness sullied the classical form's purity, imbuing it with a toxicity that caused both revulsion and contemporary racial anxieties to surface in a putatively post-racial present. In this vein of disgust, the monumental mammy was so spectacular, so objectionable, that viewers were compelled to capture and consume it, thus laying plain a compulsory desire to possess and discipline the racialized reproductive body. But instead of a procreated vessel with an afterlife sustained by permanent presence or an enfranchised lineage, the slave qua Sphinx is a site where reproduction without futurity proliferates, and the eventual demolition of both the Sphinx and factory bolsters this effect. As embodiments of pure dysfunction, the slave Sphinx and her disintegrating offspring deviate from social and aesthetic norms concerning morality, motherhood, kinship, wholeness, and reparation. They behave badly and negatively. By commingling excess and disgust through nausea, decay, toxicity, and physical recoil, a subtlety upends assumptions about art's capacity to, quote, master the presumed raw material of experience in a manner that uniquely gives value to, perhaps even redeems that material, end quote, to use critical theorist Leo Bersani's words. In its sugary form and imitation of Aunt Jemima, a subtlety produced an excessive darkness that was literally too much to stomach. The sugar Sphinx further embodied repulsion in its size, its inscrutable expression, and its left hand. With the thumb of the Sphinx's left hand clenched between its index and third finger, the gesture recalls the bigger symbol, a talisman of good luck, which has traditionally been a symbol of fertility, of protection against harm, and a flippant gesture meaning fuck you in ancient Rome and early modern Brazil and Peru, respectively. From bodies to racial categories to cultural expectations, Walker disrupts it all. And overexposure and repulsion effectively muddle any cohesive ingestion of a subtlety. The installation's formal components and its effects, coded color relations, nausea, physical recoil, and a big fuck you, dynamically refuse synthesis on the level of the art object itself and that of respectable public discourse. When Creative Time commissioned the subtlety, sugar production at the refinery had already ceased, and much of the complex was slated for demolition with the land scheduled for new mixed-use development. The building was destroyed in October 2014 and repurposed into high-end condominiums just months after a subtlety was dismantled. For these reasons, Walker's installation has been led as an act of collusion that leveraged the artist's own creative capital to drive gentrification in the area. Though valid, focusing on Black women's creative labors as sites of capitalist reproduction reduces their work to real estate endorsements rather than interrogating the marketplace of flesh, to use theorist Hortense J. Spieler's terminology, to which Black women's bodies have been consigned. Within this schema, the Black female bottom in Walker's work systematically fails to redress accelerated capitalism precisely because of the paradoxes of non-being and non-reproduction that Black female bottom embodiment engenders. Her art refuses to instantiate or correct historical experience in the present, repeatedly violating intramural calls for beauty and racial responsibility that frame Black art and Black female embodiment as modes of cultural resistance. A subtlety, in my view, instead responds to and amplifies the toxicity of the factory and its location, both the waterfront and the neighborhood. bridging site specificity and materiality with the Sphinx's non-reproductive capacities and pose, the black female bottom comprises a dispossessive force that unravels the multivalent threads and contours of imperial violence at the core of the West's hollow, yet insidious constructions of hegemony and the human. The factory's molasses caked walls and location in what long-standing Williamsburg-based community leaders at El Puente consider to be, quote, the most toxic place to live in America, end quote, are key to a Subtlety's figuration of the black female bottom. Since World War II, Williamsburg has been a working-class immigrant neighborhood primarily populated by Hasidic Jews, Italians, Dominicans, and Puerto Ricans. The heavy decline of industry in the 1960s onward precipitated a marked increase in unemployment, crime, gang activity, and unsanctioned drug use. Concurrently, concerns about the long-term environmental effects of oil spills and leakages, the lack of clean water and air, trash piles, and their connections to the area's high rates of asthma and cancer have also risen. Ultimately, Williamsburg has seen an uptick in the construction of new condominiums in the last 3 decades. Yet, as El Puente organizers maintained, quote, developers aren't telling people that this is the city's most toxic neighborhood, end quote. Once home to multiple gas, oil, energy, and food refineries and warehouses, the neighborhood sits on top of a bed of crude oil and other hazardous chemicals. A Subtlety's nausea-inducing intervention exposes the pernicious links between environmental crisis and empire. The convergence of prostration, allusions to sex work, oversized body parts at hyperbolic dimensions, the toxicity of sugar's byproducts, and the factory's surrounding environment galvanize the black female bottom. Not merely an alibi for capitalist-driven gentrification or a slavery memorial, a Subtlety made the Domino sugar refinery further unsuitable for habitation. The whole project, Walker stated at the time, quote, is predicated on the space being demolished at the end of the run of the show, end quote. And as funerary monuments, sphinxes in the ancient art contexts of Egypt, Greece, and Italy were commonly installed to ward off evil and guard the dead. Beyond the decay of the refinery, Walker's choice of materials also mattered. Quote, it was very important to me, she confesses, to have the figures made out of a substance that is so temporal and so subject to change, end quote. This attention to planned ruin, vis-a-vis temporality and the promise of decay and death, engender, like her silhouettes, a counterintuitive approach to redressing the trauma of slavery. As homage to unpaid and overworked artisans, the marvelous Sugar Baby also merges social and sexual bottoms with black labor histories that emerge at the nexus between sickness, sweetness, and sex. In popular parlance, a sugar baby is a young adult woman who dates older men that are financially stable in exchange for companionship, gifts, and sex. And historically, from the 19th century onward, black female sexuality has been linked to prostitution and disease. Walker's adoption of the negress as an art persona highlights this history and the ways in which the art world exploits black women's bodies and labors. Artwork, in other words, is sex work. Furthermore, Bersani writes in his canonical essay on homo sex, female prostitutes were imagined to, quote, spread their legs with unquenchable appetite for destruction, end quote. And linking the plantation with the outmoded workhouse, the decaying factory, and sex work, a Subtlety extends the spatial logics of the black female bottom into new territory. Prostrated with oversized buttocks and breasts perched in the air, the Sphinx's pose is one of submission. Part stereotype, part mythological creature, Walker's hybrid figure is paradoxical in its melding of the mammy figuration with the feline body. Though typically regarded as sacred and enigmatic, the blackness of the mammy and the exposure of the cap, another word for vagina, in terms of the sculpture's body and its female genitalia, rarely present in extant sphinxes of antiquity, merges the black female bottom with hypervisibility and perversion at the level of social degradation and sexual subjection. the publicness, indeed the outsideness, of the Sphinx's alterity and its reproductive parts. The vulva is the outside part of the female reproductive system, whereas the vagina is the passageway. Rhymes with the sculpture's construction. It is hollow on the inside. The marvelous sugar baby is therefore all surface. There is no interiority. Furthermore, the melding of the mammy and the over-endowed prostrated sphinx in a decomposing enclosure raises important questions about the mattering of race and gender in the new millennium, as well as desirability's relationship to the categories of woman, mother, and by extension, the human. The massive steel beams of the domino sugar plant appeared to encage the creature, while visitors ogled her, poked at her, and photographed her. In this way, a subtlety recalls the Hottentot Venus's display as a freak show and ethnographic museum attraction in early 19th century Europe. As Evelyn Hammond's outlines, quote, crudely exhibited and objectified by European audiences and scientific experts because of what they regarded as unusual aspects of her physiognomy, her genitalia, and her buttocks. Quote, the Hottentot Venus's primitive genitalia became a sign for the equally primitive sexual appetite. Thus, the black female became the antithesis of European social mores and beauty, and was relegated to the lowest position on the scale of human development, end quote. For these reasons, black feminist theorist Janelle Hobbs argues a big booty signifies sexual excess and is, quote, often associated with and serves as a stand-in for black women's sexualities, end quote. A subtlety, Hobson writes, also recreates the ubiquitous pop culture image of scantily clad black models on all fours. In so doing, quote, Walker connects contemporary black women's bodies to a history of animalizing the bodies of women and Africans, as well as to a history of empire and New World slavery, end quote. Combined with the rotting factory and its beams of containment, marshalling the Hottentot Venus as a specter and an analog reinforces the notion that Walker's Sphinx is an animal specifically, is an animal in a zoo. Her use of sugar as an attraction was also at play here. Both the phenomena center the black female body and bottom as tropes of disorder, underlining the impact that slavery and colonialism have had on definitions of gender and human life. A subtlety staging of blackness and animality, black feminist scholar Amber Messer tells us, displaces the liberal subject because black women fall outside of the purview of normative understandings of agency that are subtended by whiteness and fantasies of consent. The figure's hybridity as queer, woman, animal instead gestures, quote, toward a consideration of sexuality that revolves around the body and its pleasures. In this schema, the relationships between agency and subjectivity, perversion and normality lose meaning, end quote. Walker's use of sugar and molasses as flesh becomes even more potent here. This centering of matter combined with the hollowness of the sculpture and the fraudulent animal-human hybridity it recruits for its form push pressure on the newness of environmental humanities and contemporary theories of materialism within non-human and post-human discourse. On the whole, and within feminist new materialist theory specifically, these debates neglect the, quote, anti-black, sexuated economies of exchange and assignations of meaning, value, and significance, end quote, that subtend the discourse as critical theorist Zakiya Iman-Jackson outlines. More than cataloging how American empire was produced against and with minoritarian subjects, a subtlety articulates black female abjection as a precondition for the human that in turn facilitates and maintains hierarchical order. In its blinding opacity and surface aesthetics, a subtlety is both sublime and abject, a disorderly figure that upends normative notions of beauty, agency, humanity, and power in both art and everyday life. Furthermore, the Sphinx is not based in reality, nor is it an amalgam that appears in the natural world. It is a mythological creature. It is iconographic, a passageway that yields toxicity and repulsion, not redress. enlightenment, or total integration. Just as a subtlety stages a radical reckoning with empire's toxicity and contemporary reach, Walker's 2019 Hyundai-funded Public Art Commission at the Tate Modern situates the Black female bottom of industrial architecture, monumentality, empire, power, capital, and the environment. The large-scale Greco-Romanesque figures, particularly the Venus at the apex of the fountain, initiate discourse about the ill-gotten cultural inheritances of the Black Atlantic. Famed art historian Robert Ferris Thompson first introduced the concept of the Black Atlantic in 1983, and Black British cultural studies scholar Paul Gilroy elaborated the framework in his off-cited book of the same name of 1993 to describe the enduring linkages between the transatlantic slave trade and the origins of modernity. Gilroy's Black Atlantic also underscores the fluid and dynamic qualities of Black identity formation that exceed essentialism and national borders, as well as culturally hybrid forms of music, art, literature, and religion that have and continue to serve as sites of Black resistance across the diaspora. Fons Americanus transmutes Walker's extra-sensuous investments in materiality and monumental ruin to the transnational memory of slavery in Great Britain for the first time, thus connecting two prominent locales within the Black Atlantic world, the US and the UK. Comprised of recyclable materials such as wood and cork, as well as a non-toxic acrylic and cement composite used for casting and sculpting, the sculpture features Walker's signature topsy-turvy aesthetics. But its materials and depiction of the mammy stereotype as a kind of Venus departs from a subtlety in key ways. Unlike a subtlety, Fons Americanus was never meant to have a physical afterlife. Eschewing permanence, the fountain's materials were dismantled and recycled at the close of the exhibition. With a focus on sustainability and planned ruin, in addition to site specificity and structures of containment, the fountain juxtaposes decomposition and disorder with imperial and environmental control. Comprised of figures in various states of decomposition and deliquescence, bottoming and Fons Americanus coalesces in the arrangements and appearances of bodies. The Pieta of Emmett Till appears in the lowest pool at the rear of the fountain. The figure is completely fused into the surrounding structure, so much so that it is hard to tell the two forms apart, a state of becoming and unbecoming that derives from his gradual dissolution, much like the Sphinx's sugar babies. The crowning Venus figure spouts water from her orifices and throat, which has been cut, another undoing, while the bottom half of the body blends into this plinth on which she stands. Four figures populate the tier below her. A minstrel caricature of Queen Victoria holds her large breast out of her dress in an attempt to shower the crouching and terrified figure beneath her. Neither water nor milk, however, flows from her chest. Separate from, but adjacent to, and in conversation with Fons Americanus, is the standalone sculpture Shell Grotto. It is more intimate than Fons Americanus because of its less monumental scale, yet every bit as discomfiting. A white scalloped shell opens to reveal a pockmarked ground. A white base undulates with serpentine lines, shadowed holes, and curvaceous edges. At the center, a bust of a young Black figure with an unidentified gender and sex emerges from a dark hole. A single tear streams down its face. The figure looks upward, out of the hole, their eyes open wide in terror. It is difficult to tell whether they are ascending or descending from the crevice, which takes the shape of a stretched anus. For Walker, Shell Grotto references a specific site where indigenous Africans who refused to board slave ships were thrown on Sierra Leone's Bunce Island, a slave trading fortress at the western edge of the Black Atlantic. Western to who? The stretched hole in the base of the shell is at once a killing ground, a metaphor for those at the bottom of the Black Atlantic, and an instantiation of the non-procreated anal opening that conflates desirability and degradation. Walker writes, quote, "The last resting place of the rebellious, unbreakable African, a dry well into which uncooperative non-slaves were thrown away to die, end quote, was designed to be the first image to greet visitors in the space. Here, Walker situates the hole and anal opening as graves and primary entrees into the tiers of bottoming that constitute Fons Americanus. These entryways are racialized terrain, sites of racial sexual meaning-making that function beyond mere penetration. Bottoming here is also about social subordination and quotidian acts of racial and sexual violence that stand at the edge of spectacularity. The spouting disabled Venus atop the fountain is the pinnacle of Walker's machinations of the black female bottom. Made of whitened cork, Walker's Venus, like the rest of Fons Americanus, is roughly sculpted. Marks of tools and fingers linger on her face, arms, breasts, and belly, a fleshy figure that has simultaneously been underworked and overworked. Her disfigured flesh bears the gashes and labor of her creation. With shark-infested waters below her, her head tilts back towards the ceiling. Her neck is slashed, placing her in an impossible position. Suspended between life and death, the Venus spurts water from her neck and her nipples into the pools beneath her as she lifts her arms and curls her fingers. This expression of ecstasy combined with the figure's status and physical undoing, her unbecoming, unsettles the venerative function of commemorative sculpture. By placing her at the summit, Walker also inverts the fountain's hierarchical flow. The debased, dying figure is now a kind of power bottom that harnesses pleasure and pain in alternative, counterintuitive ways. Rather than the classical image of white Western beauty, Walker's Venus embodies the effects of loss and rupture that issue from being systematically banished from home, family, and country. The force of her transgressive presence stems from a composed negativity. Because of her position, socially, aesthetically, and physiologically, suspended between life and death, she is incapacitated. Strategically disabled from nourishing or saving others, she compositionally refuses the concomitant roles expected of the mammy as nursemaid and black women as caregivers and social change agents. The black female bottom consequently embodies a shadow feminism that, as Jack Halberstam describes, quote, finds purpose in its own failure, end quote. The artist envisions her Venus figure as, quote, a mother, wet nurse, whore, saint, host, lover. She is the daughter of the waters, end quote, a passageway that yields more of the same. Reproduction without futurity is on display here once again, with liquid that circulates without resolve. The water that flows from her body feeds the tears below her, but it does not initiate change or progress, nor does it comfort the figures, wedged in place, fixed in pain, that suffer beneath her. Walker's Venus does not preside over the fountain as an emblem of beauty or fecundity. She leaks and produces a life-giving element without the promise or future of repair. This Venus is not a symbol of origin or continuity, but a site of rupture. Her disability is not incidental, it is strategic. Incapacitated from saving others, she refuses the demand that black women provide care, redemption, or social progress. Unlike imperial fountains that promise purification or mastery over nature, Fons Americanus offers no cleansing. The fountain stages liquidity without transcendence, movement without escape or triumph. Liquid accumulates only to overflow without resolve. In being productive but not generative, she forces a distinction between black women's work as artists and caregivers and art's capacity to mitigate historical trauma. In its refusal of permanence, futurity, and consolation, Fons Americanus reconfigures the commemorative logic of public sculpture, the cultural authority of classical form, and the black woman as victim. Through the material and metaphoric use of water, it situates the undesirable black female figure within industrial architecture, monumentality, power, and the environment, bridging liquid blackness with liquid antiquity. Liquidity here does not signal hybridity or fusion alone. It emerges as method rather than metaphor, a mode of working that posits erosion over endurance, circulation over accumulation, and non-normative relationality over hierarchy as a practice of disordering the unfettered, unresolved violences that stem from imperialism's toxicity. Within classical studies and art history, Brooke Holmes' concept of liquid antiquity challenges the persistent treatment of Greco-Roman antiquity as a solid, immutable foundation that anchors Western civilization and aesthetic value. She instead theorizes antiquity as a fluid resource that moves across time through citation, distortion, adaptation, and rematerialization. Liquid antiquity foregrounds permeability between past and present, undermining claims to timelessness, purity, and authority that historically position the classical canon as Eurocentric inheritance. Antiquity is not necessarily preserved in this framework, but rather continually reactivated, where the conditions of its reception reshape and remake its meanings. Alessandra Reingold's theory of liquid blackness, developed through her collaborative work with artists and visual culture scholars, posits Black expressive practices as modes of fugitivity, porosity, and overflow that evade capture under and against regimes of representation. Rather than reading liquidity as instability or loss, Reingold frames it as an aesthetic and political strategy, a means by which blackness already exceeds the structures designed to fix, commodify, extract, or exhaust it. Liquid blackness emphasizes circulation without containment, movement without resolution, and productivity without exploitation. Productivity without assimilation. Importantly, it insists that Black cultural forms do not merely reflect liquidity imposed from above, but actively produce it as a mode of survival, critique, and world-making. While liquidity promises flexibility and movement, it takes on new meaning for racialized gendered subjects, where refusing fixity underpins intersectional marginalization and precarity, even as global contemporary art aestheticizes it as innovation and novelty. Thinking liquid antiquity and liquid blackness together exposes the uneven distribution of liquidity's risks and rewards. Walker's paradigmatic turn to public monumental sculpture as an ideal medium for grappling with the material and socio-political remnants of slavery's legacies in the West coincides with the acceleration of Black women's hypervisibility and white supremacist activity in the U.S. public sphere. This shift in the artist's practice also corresponds with the increase in her own publicness, her celebrity status, and her hypervisible exposure as a Black woman artist with international appeal. Of the influences for Fons Americanus, Walker recalls, quote, "I wondered how to return the gift of having come to be. Through the mechanics of finance, exploitation, murder, rape, death, ecological destruction, co-optation, coercion, love, seafaring feats, bravery, slavery, loss, injustice, excess, cruelty, tenacity, submission, and progress. Conceived here in the United States to live in this time and place with this opportunity, this ability," end quote. Walker's reflections link her creative practice with her body's reproductive capacities and offer further insights into her self-conscious engagement with structures of marginalization and containment vis-a-vis the Black female bottom. "My work," she tells us, quote, "has always been a time machine, catapulting me backwards across decades and centuries to arrive at some understanding of my place in the contemporary moment," end quote. This position, for Walker, is a fraught one that demands self-objectification and minoritarian strategies of refusal. On the occasion of her September 2017 exhibition of new paintings, at her New York gallery 2 years before Fons Americanus debuted, Walker issued 2 corresponding public statements that rejected the social and market protocols that constrain Black women artists working in the United States. Once again, explicitly bridging Black women's visual work with sex work, the first statement was a tongue-in-cheek press release written in the darkly humorous vernacular that has become one of the artist's signature modes of communication. The first line of the statement reads, quote, "Collectors of fine art will flock to see the latest Carol Walker offerings. And what is she offering but the finest selection of artworks by an African-American living woman artist this side of the Mississippi?" End quote. The statement goes on to narrate how scholars, art historians, and students of color will, quote, study and debate the historical value and intellectual merits of Walker's diversionary tactics, end quote, and exercise their free right to culturally annihilate her on social media. The final half of the press release lists the future reactions of parents and their censorship, former lovers and their recoil, as well as the withdrawal of support, the bemused silence, the winces, the disturbing delight, and other anticipated actions from critics, academic societies, gallery directors, as well as, finally, the president. The statement ends with a prediction, quote, empires will fall, although which ones, only time will tell, end quote. Walker's press release and the accompanying artist statement satirize the fundamental linkages between the art market and imperial expansion. Her declarations also undermine the burdens of representation that demands both her presence and subjugation in the art world and the wider world. Against the backdrop of ongoing anti-Black violence globally and locally, Walker's 2017 artist statements generated a string of commentaries in the news and on social media. The perspectives ranged from valorizing the artist for her bravery in confronting systems of oppression while remaining committed to artistic freedom, to dissatisfaction and dissent directed at the artist's refusal to stand up and be counted as a Black woman artist amid present-day social and political upheaval. It's too much, she declared in her supplemental artist statement, quote, knowing full well that my right, my capacity to live in this godforsaken country as a proudly raced and urgently gendered person is under threat by random groups of white male supremacist goons who flaunt a kind of patched-together notion of race purity with flags and torches and impressive displays of perpetrator as victim sociopathy, end quote. Walker's interjection directly references the 2016 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, and crystallizes the triple otherness that stems from Black women's historical and contemporary position at the bottom of the social order. It also undermines Black artists' frustration with the new millennium, enamored with aspirational and affirmative engagements with race, gender, sexuality, and class status that ultimately fail to yield social progress, much less physical or legal protection. Like a subtlety, the social media attention that her 2017 statements garnered brought a measure of visibility to the conditions under and against which minoritarian figures and their aesthetic strategies exist and work, despite the fact that Walker is well known for pointing out the limits of art's potential to repair historical trauma. Critics and fellow artists nevertheless desired her and her creative labors to salve the long history of racial strife in the United States. She refuses, however, then and now, to embrace the top as a position of power and privilege, despite her increased publicness and celebrity, eschewing debilitating social and aesthetic expectations regarding what Black women in their art should do. Quote, I know what you all expect from me and I have complied up to a point. But frankly, I am tired. I am tired of standing up, being counted, tired of having a voice, or worse, being a role model, end quote. Psychologists and social scientists generally identify role models as motivators for individuals, and for historically stigmatized and disenfranchised subjects, especially, to set and accomplish ambitious goals in high-stakes achievement settings. Walker rejects the disciplinary function of role models, underlining Black political theorist Joy James's provocations about the impasse between revolution and love, between theory and praxis, wherein no consensus currently exists on how to respond to the predatory formations of anti-Black empires. In so doing, Walker and her unruly progeny approximate the captive maternal that is better understood as an epistemic function rather than an identity marker. The artist's genuflections and prostrations, in turn, resist the conflation of respectability politics with achievement and freedom in the art world and the wider world. The baseline work that the captive maternal figure, the black female bottom, performs under the burden of praxis stabilizes the very social and state structures that prey on her. The labor it takes to be on top, to be a top, is exhausting. Walker thus declares, from the mammy to the Venus to the contemporary black woman artist herself, she instead rolls her eyes, folds her arms, and waits. Walker's embodied and emboldened embrace of the lower registers of art and identity, her marshalling of demoted art forms, her mocking of ennobled art forms, and her sustained engagement with debasement vis-a-vis dark humor, defecation, the grotesque, disgust, toxicity, planned ruin, and repulsion, all constitute the black female bottom. Such self-conscious enactments, in my view, respond to the art world's consumption of black women's work and image, precipitating Walker's figurations of the negress as a subject and a maker persona. Her depictions of the perverse entanglements between body and environment, form and affect, molasses boys carrying the dismembered limbs of their kin, for instance, as they collectively slowly disintegrate, highlight the manifold ways in which the art world and the wider world continually and structurally demarcate black women's bodies as sites of reproduction without futurity. Walker's choices of materials and the relationship between the passage of time formally reflect this phenomenon as they break down and erode. Both Subtlety and Fons Americanus were designed to decay and disappear, and their ruin is deliberate, calculated, site-responsive. Additionally, in perpetuity, both sculptures can only ever present a fragment of themselves as photographic documentation, as ephemera, and as actual fragment, vis-a-vis the molasses boys and the Sphinx's left hand, in the case of a Subtlety. Thus, Walker's staging of reproduction without futurity becomes an opportunity for the artist to episodically disrupt the marketplace of flesh that constrains her creative potential by demanding that the black female subject persistently visualize and embody her own subjugation for capital gain. Subtlety and Fons Americanus amplify how fantasies and fictions about the black female bottom in American culture as a body part and as an environmental concept refract and constrain black women's visual work. The first inundated viewers and visitors with olfactory and gustatory effects, and the second inverted the values of high and low, top and bottom. Both artworks transmute the displays of racial and sexual abjection in Walker's silhouettes to aesthetic experiences that exceed the visual. In these works, the black female bottom operates as an aesthetic intervention, a site-specific character, a social and sexual position of submission and degradation, and a space of sensual excess that pivots on decay and decomposition. This excess actively challenges the social and structural constraints of a marketplace that demands that black women artists be both marginal and hypervisible, vulnerable, yet also in active pursuit of healing and empowerment in order to redress their persistent subjugation. In untethering blackness and its embodiment from the binary of trauma and redemption, Walker expands the terrain of art's engagement with black women's social and sexual lives in the new millennium by claiming negativity as a tertiary space that advances new ways of seeing and being. Considering the current U.S. political climate, ongoing racial and gender violence, and debates about the relationship between art and social change, this work is both of its time and urgent. Thank you.